The autumn wind carried the scent of dying leaves and distant rain as Gareth trudged through the forest path, his worn boots sinking into the soft earth with each weary step. The sun hung low behind a veil of grey clouds, casting the world in shades of silver and shadow. He was a simple man, this Gareth, a peasant who worked the fields beyond the village of Thornmere, his hands calloused from the plough, his back bent from years of labour under the watchful eye of Lord Blackwood's steward. Today, he had been gathering firewood in the deeper woods, venturing farther than usual because the easy pickings near the village had long been exhausted. Winter was coming, and every family scrambled to stockpile what warmth they could before the frost turned merciless. As Gareth paused to catch his breath and adjust the heavy bundle of branches strapped to his back, he heard it, a sound so faint, so pitiful, that at first he thought it merely the wind playing tricks through the hollow trees. But there it came again, a thin, desperate whimpering that spoke of pain and fear. Gareth's heart, already tender despite the hardness of his life, seized with concern. He knew these woods held dangers, knew that wolves prowled the deeper reaches and that bears sometimes wandered down from the mountains when food grew scarce. Yet that sound pulled at something primal within him, something that remembered vulnerability and the mercy that separates men from beasts. He followed the sound off the path, pushing through a tangle of thorny undergrowth that tore at his threadbare tunic and scratched his weathered face. The whimpering grew louder, more urgent, and then he saw it. Nestled in a small depression beneath the exposed roots of an ancient oak, half buried in fallen leaves, lay a small creature. It was no larger than a rabbit, covered in matted grey fur, its eyes barely open, and it trembled violently in the cold. Blood stained the leaves around it, and Gareth could see a gash along its hind leg, where something, perhaps a hawk or a fox, had tried to make a meal of it. Without hesitation, Gareth knelt beside the creature, his rough hands surprisingly gentle as he reached out. The animal flinched at first, a weak growl rumbling in its tiny throat, but it was too injured, too cold, too near death to truly resist. As Gareth lifted it carefully, cradling it against his chest, he examined it more closely. The pointed ears, the elongated snout, the paws that seemed too large for its body. Yes, this was a wolf pup, he was certain. He had seen wolves before, had heard their haunting songs echo across the valley on winter nights, had even once glimpsed a pack moving like grey ghosts through the snow. This was one of their young, somehow separated from its mother, left to die alone in the cold embrace of the forest. Most men would have left it. Wolves were dangerous after all, predators that threatened livestock and sometimes even travellers foolish enough to wander alone after dark. Lord Blackwood himself had posted bounties on wolf pelts, encouraging hunters to thin their numbers. To save a wolf, even a pup, was to invite trouble. Yet Gareth found himself tucking the small creature inside his tunic, where it could feel the warmth of his body, feel the steady beat of his heart. Perhaps it was foolishness. Perhaps it was the fact that he himself had known what it meant to be abandoned and alone when his own parents had perished during the fever that swept through Thornmere 10 years past. Whatever the reason, he could not simply walk away. The journey back to the village took longer than usual, as Gareth moved carefully to avoid jostling the injured pup. He could feel it breathing against his chest, feel its small body gradually stop shivering as his warmth seeped into it. He talked to it softly, nonsense words of comfort, the way his mother used to talk to him when he was frightened as a child. The forest seemed to watch him, the trees standing like silent witnesses to this strange act of mercy. Crows called from the branches overhead, their harsh voices sounding almost like warnings, but Gareth paid them no mind. When he finally emerged from the tree line and saw the familiar thatched roofs of Thornmere spreading before him, smoke rising from chimneys in preparation for the evening meal, he felt a surge of relief. His own cottage stood at the edge of the village, a small structure of wattle and daub, with a roof that leaked in 3 places when it rained. It was humble, barely more than a single room with a hearth and a straw mattress, but it was home. He had lived there alone since his parents' death, scraping by on what little the land yielded and what few coins he could earn through day labor. Inside, Gareth gently laid the pup on a folded blanket near the hearth. He built up the fire until the room glowed with warmth and light, then fetched water and clean rags. The pup watched him with eyes that seemed far too intelligent, far too aware for such a young creature. As Gareth cleaned the wound on its leg, the pup whimpered, but did not snap or bite. The gash was deep, but not fatal, and Gareth used a poultice his mother had taught him to make from crushed herbs and honey, binding it with strips torn from an old shirt. That night, as the wind howled outside and rain began to patter against the thatch, Gareth sat by the fire with the pup curled in his lap. He fed it warm milk, which it lapped up eagerly, and for the first time in years he did not feel quite so alone. There was something profound in the trust this wild creature placed in him, something that made the darkness of his little cottage feel less oppressive. He named it Storm, for the weather that raged outside and for the wildness he sensed sleeping within those grey eyes. Days passed and Storm grew stronger. The wound on its leg began to heal, though the pup still limped when it walked. Gareth found himself hurrying home after his work in the fields, eager to see the little creature, to watch it play with a ball of twine or gnaw on a bone he had saved from his meagre supper. He knew he should keep Storm hidden, knew that if word spread through the village that he was harboring a wolf, there would be trouble. Yet he could not bring himself to turn the animal out. Not yet. Not when it looked at him with such devotion. Not when it curled against him at night and kept the nightmares at bay. But secrets, like seeds, have a way of sprouting when least expected. It was old Marta from the neighbouring cottage who first glimpsed Storm through Gareth's window one evening. Her eyes had widened, and though she said nothing to Gareth directly, by the next morning whispers had begun to circulate. The blacksmith mentioned it to the baker to the miller's wife to the priest. Soon everyone in Thornmere knew that Gareth the peasant had taken in a wolf pup, and opinions were divided. Some thought it a harmless eccentricity, others a dangerous foolishness, and still others whispered that there was something unnatural about it. Something that smacked of the old pagan ways that the church had tried so hard to stamp out. It was on the 7th day, after Gareth had found Storm, that Brother Aldrich, the village healer, appeared at his door. The monk was a thin man with kind eyes and hands that always smelled of herbs and incense. He had tended to Thornmere's sick and injured for 20 years, ever since the monastery in the valley had sent him to serve the people in this remote corner of Lord Blackwood's domain. Gareth respected Brother Aldrich, had been grateful when the monk had tried, unsuccessfully, to save his mother from the fever all those years ago. Brother Aldrich entered the cottage without waiting for an invitation, his expression concerned. Gareth stood quickly, instinctively moving to place himself between the monk and Storm, who growled softly from his place near the hearth. The sound made Brother Aldrich pause, his eyes narrowing as he studied the small animal. "Tell me it is not true, Gareth," the monk said quietly, his voice heavy with worry. "Tell me you have not brought a wolf into your home." Gareth swallowed hard, his mind racing for the right words. "He is just a pup, Brother Aldrich. He was dying in the forest. I could not leave him there." The monk moved closer, and Storm's growl grew louder, though the pup did not rise from where it lay. Brother Aldrich knelt slowly, his movements deliberate and unthreatening, and extended his hand toward the animal. Storm sniffed cautiously, then allowed the monk to touch its head, to run his fingers through the grey fur. For a long moment, Brother Aldrich examined the creature in silence, his brow furrowed in concentration. Then, slowly, the colour drained from his face. His hand trembled as he pulled it back, and when he looked up at Gareth, there was fear in his eyes, raw and unmistakable. "This is no wolf," the monk whispered, his voice barely audible over the crackling of the fire. Dear God in heaven, Gareth, this is no wolf. Gareth felt his stomach drop, a cold dread spreading through his chest. What do you mean? Of course it is a wolf. Look at it. Brother Aldrich stood abruptly, backing away from Storm as if the pup might suddenly transform into something monstrous. His lips moved in silent prayer, and his hand went to the wooden cross hanging around his neck. No, he said again more firmly this time. I have seen wolves, Gareth. I have treated men mauled by wolves, have examined their bodies when they did not survive. I know wolves. This creature has the form of a wolf pup, yes, but look closer. Look at the spacing of the eyes, the shape of the skull, the pattern of the fur. Look at how it watches us, how it understands. This is not a wolf. Then what is it? Gareth demanded, his voice rising with frustration and fear. He looked down at Storm, who gazed back at him with those strange, intelligent eyes, and for the first time, doubt crept into his heart. Brother Aldrich moved to the window, peering out as if to ensure they were not being overheard, then turned back to Gareth with a grave expression. There are legends, he began, his voice low and urgent, old stories from before the church came to these lands, stories the priests tell us to ignore, to dismiss as pagan foolishness. But my own master, the abbot who trained me in the healing arts, he was an old man who remembered the old ways. He told me things, showed me books that were kept hidden in the deepest vaults of the monastery. He spoke of creatures that once walked these woods, creatures that were neither fully beast nor fully something else. Gareth felt his mouth go dry. What are you saying, brother? The monk took a deep breath as if steeling himself. The old legends speak of the children of the moon, beings who could shift their shape between man and wolf. Most believed them to be demons, servants of darkness who preyed upon the innocent. The church hunted them, burned them, drove them into extinction or into hiding so deep that they became nothing more than stories told to frighten children. But some of the older texts suggested a different truth. They said that the children of the moon were neither good nor evil, but simply different, that they lived according to their own nature, which was both human and wolf. They said that these beings could be recognized even in their beast form by certain signs, the unusual intelligence in their eyes, the unnatural understanding they possessed, and most tellingly, by a mark. What mark? Gareth asked, though part of him did not want to know the answer. Brother Aldrich knelt again beside Storm, and this time the pup did not growl. The monk gently parted the fur on the animal's chest, exposing the skin beneath. And there, faint but unmistakable, was a birthmark in the shape of a crescent moon, dark against the pale skin. Gareth's breath caught in his throat. He had seen that mark when he first bathed Storm, had thought nothing of it, had assumed it merely an ordinary birthmark such as many creatures possess. This, Brother Aldrich said, touching the mark with one trembling finger, is the sign of the children of the moon. Gareth, what you have saved is not a wolf pup. It is a child. A human child, cursed or blessed, depending on your perspective, with the ability to take the form of a wolf. And if the old stories are true, if even a fraction of what my master told me has any basis in reality, then this child is in terrible danger. There are those who would kill it simply for existing, who believe that any creature that straddles the line between human and beast is an abomination that must be destroyed. Gareth sank onto his stool, his legs suddenly unable to support him. His mind reeled, trying to reconcile what Brother Aldrich was telling him with the small, vulnerable creature that had curled against his chest, that had licked his fingers and whimpered in its sleep. A child, he murmured. A human child. In one form, yes, the monk confirmed. The old texts said that the children of the moon are born in wolf form and do not take their human shape until they reach a certain age, usually around 7 or 8 years by human reckoning. Until then, they live as wolves, raised by their own kind if they are fortunate, left to die if they are not. This one was separated somehow. Perhaps its family was killed by hunters. Perhaps it simply wandered too far and became lost. You found it at the most vulnerable point of its existence, when it is neither fully one thing nor the other, when it cannot defend itself or even understand what it truly is. Gareth looked at Storm, and the pup looked back, and in that moment Gareth knew with absolute certainty that he could not abandon this child, for that is what it was, regardless of the form it currently wore. It did not matter that the creature was born to a shape different from his own, did not matter that there were those who would call it a monster. He had saved it, had promised it safety through his actions if not his words, and he would not break that promise now. "What do I do?" he asked Brother Aldrich, his voice steady despite the fear that churned in his gut. "How do I protect it?" The monk was silent for a long moment, his eyes distant as he thought. Finally, he spoke. "You must keep it hidden, at least until it makes its first transformation. Once it takes human form, it will be easier to protect, easier to conceal its true nature. But until then, you must tell no one what I have told you. If word spreads, if Lord Blackwood learns of this, he will send his hunters. The nobility, for all their supposed Christian virtue, are often the most superstitious. They fear what they do not understand, and they destroy it. But people already know I have taken in a wolf pup," Gareth protested. "Marta saw it, and she has surely told others." "Then let them think it is merely a wolf," Brother Aldrich said firmly. "Let them think you are a foolish peasant with a soft heart. That is far safer than the truth. I will tell anyone who asks that I examined the animal and found it to be an ordinary wolf, nothing more. I will say that I advised you to release it into the wild once it is healed, and that you agreed. That should quell most of the gossip." "And if it does not?" Gareth asked. "If someone decides that even an ordinary wolf is too dangerous to tolerate?" The monk's expression was grim. "Then you must be prepared to flee, to take the child and run far from here, to some place where the old superstitions are weaker, where the church's reach is less absolute. There are places in the north, remote villages in the mountains, where the old ways still hold some sway, where a child of the moon might live without fear. It would be a hard life, Gareth, harder even than what you have known. But it would be life, and that is worth something." Gareth nodded slowly, his resolve hardening. He thought of his own childhood, of the warmth and safety his parents had provided despite their poverty, of the love that had sustained him through the darkest times. Every child deserved that, deserved to grow up knowing they were wanted, that they mattered. This child, whatever form it wore, would have that chance if he had anything to say about it. Brother Aldrich rose to leave, pausing at the door. "I will pray for you, Gareth," he said softly, "and I will watch over you as best I can. But be careful. The world is not kind to those who are different, and it is even less kind to those who shelter them." After the monk departed, Gareth sat in the firelight with Storm curled in his lap, his mind turning over everything he had learned. The pup, no, the child, slept peacefully, its small chest rising and falling with each breath. Gareth stroked its fur gently, marveling at the strangeness of it all, at the twist of fate that had brought them together. He wondered about the child's family, about what had happened to them. Had they been killed by hunters, as Brother Aldrich suggested? Were they somewhere even now, searching desperately for their lost pup? Or had they abandoned it, unable or unwilling to care for a child that straddled two worlds? The next weeks were tense. Gareth kept Storm hidden as much as possible, only allowing the pup outside at night, when the village slept and the darkness concealed them. He continued his work in the fields, enduring the sidelong glances and whispered comments of his neighbors. Some were merely curious, asking when he planned to release the wolf, as Brother Aldrich had supposedly advised. Others were openly hostile, muttering that no good could come of keeping such a creature, that it would turn on him eventually as its wild nature asserted itself. Gareth deflected their concerns with vague assurances that he would release Storm soon, when the animal was fully healed and strong enough to survive on its own. But Storm was changing. The limp from the injured leg had faded entirely, and the pup grew with astonishing speed, its body filling out, its movements becoming more coordinated and powerful. It was as if the child within was pushing toward its transformation, the wolf form straining at some invisible boundary. Gareth noticed other changes too. Storm seemed to understand his words with uncanny precision, following complex instructions that no ordinary wolf could possibly comprehend. When Gareth spoke to the pup, explaining why it needed to stay hidden, why it could not howl or make noise that would draw attention, Storm would tilt its head and fix him with those intelligent eyes, and Gareth knew with absolute certainty that the child understood. Winter arrived with a vengeance, blanketing Thornmere in snow and ice. The fields lay fallow, and work became scarce. Gareth survived on what little he had stored away and on the charity of Brother Aldrich, who occasionally appeared at his door with bread or a bit of dried meat, always asking after Storm, always reminding Gareth to be vigilant. The isolation of winter was a blessing in some ways. As fewer people ventured out in the bitter cold, fewer eyes might spot Storm during their brief excursions into the forest. But it was also harder, as the small cottage offered little protection against the wind that howled through the cracks in the walls, and fuel for the fire was precious. It was on the longest night of the year, when darkness stretched from afternoon to morning and the stars wheeled cold and distant overhead, that the transformation began. Gareth woke to a sound he had never heard before, a sound that was neither howl nor human cry, but something in between, filled with pain and confusion. He leapt from his bed to find Storm writhing on the floor, the pup's body convulsing, fur seeming to shift and ripple as if alive. Gareth knelt beside the creature, helpless and terrified, wanting to comfort but not knowing how, not knowing if his touch would help or harm. The transformation lasted hours, an agonizing process that left Gareth shaking and Storm whimpering pitifully. Slowly, impossibly, the wolf shape began to blur, to reshape itself. Bones lengthened and shifted, fur receded into skin, the snout flattened into a face. It was like watching clay being remolded by invisible hands, like witnessing something that should not be possible, that defied every natural law Gareth had ever known. He could do nothing but watch, tears streaming down his face, praying to a god he rarely thought about that the child would survive this ordeal. As dawn's first light crept through the window, the transformation completed. Where Storm the wolf pup had been, there now lay a child, a boy who looked to be perhaps 5 or 6 years old, naked and trembling on the cold floor. His hair was the same grey as the wolf's fur, his eyes the same penetrating amber. The crescent birthmark stood out clearly on his chest, and along his leg was a scar where the wound had been. The boy stared up at Gareth with an expression of utter bewilderment, and then, in a voice rough from disuse, he spoke his first word. "Father." Gareth's heart broke and mended in the same instant. He gathered the child into his arms, wrapping him in blankets, holding him close as he had held the wolf pup that first night. The boy clung to him, shaking not just from cold, but from the shock of transformation, from the sudden weight of human consciousness settling over a mind that had known only wolf thoughts. Gareth rocked him gently, murmuring words of comfort, and in that moment he understood that this was no longer just about saving a life. This was about family, about the bond that forms between souls who find each other in a dark world and refuse to let go. The boy adapted to his human form with surprising speed, though there were challenges. He had to learn to walk on 2 legs, to use hands instead of paws, to speak in words rather than growls and whimpers. Gareth taught him everything, patient as any father, celebrating each small victory. The child, whom Gareth now called Thomas, a good Christian name that would raise no suspicions, proved remarkably intelligent. He absorbed knowledge like a sponge, learning not just how to navigate his human body, but also the customs and expectations of the human world Gareth described to him. But Thomas did not forget what he was. Sometimes, especially at night, Gareth would wake to find the boy standing at the window, staring out at the forest with a longing so intense it was almost painful to witness. Thomas spoke of memories from his wolf life, fragmented and dreamlike, of running with a pack, of the taste of fresh meat, of the comfort of sleeping in a den surrounded by warm bodies. He remembered his mother, a great silver wolf with eyes like moonlight, and his siblings, though their faces were fading like mist. He did not know what had happened to them, could not recall the moment of separation, only the terror and loneliness that followed. Gareth assured Thomas that he was not alone now, that he had a home here for as long as he needed it. Yet he also knew that they could not hide forever. Spring would come, people would venture out more frequently, and Thomas would need to interact with the village. They needed a story, a plausible explanation for the sudden appearance of a child in Gareth's care. Brother Aldrich helped with this, spreading word that Thomas was the orphaned son of Gareth's cousin from a distant village, sent to live with his only surviving relative after plague had taken his parents. It was a common enough tale in these hard times, and most accepted it without question. Still, there were those who looked at Thomas with suspicion, who noticed the strange color of his eyes, the way he moved with a grace that seemed almost inhuman, the manner in which dogs would alternately cower from him or treat him with unusual deference. Old Marta in particular watched the boy with narrowed eyes, muttering that there was something unnatural about him, though she could never quite articulate what. Gareth knew they were living on borrowed time, that eventually someone would see Thomas transform, or the boy's wolf nature would assert itself in a way that could not be explained away. The crisis came in early spring, when the snow had melted, but the ground was still cold, and the trees remained bare. A group of hunters from Lord Blackwood's estate rode into Thornmere, led by Sir Edmund, the Lord's master of the hunt. They had been tracking a wolf pack that had attacked a shepherd's flock near the castle, killing several sheep and injuring the shepherd himself. Sir Edmund was a hard man, cold-eyed and merciless, the sort who saw the world in absolutes, who believed that anything that threatened the established order must be eliminated without hesitation. The hunters went door to door, questioning the villagers, asking if anyone had seen signs of wolves, heard their howling, noticed tracks. When they came to Gareth's cottage, Thomas was inside while Gareth was outside splitting firewood. Sir Edmund dismounted, his hand resting casually on the sword at his hip, and looked Gareth up and down with barely concealed contempt. "You are Gareth, the one who took in a wolf pup some months past," Sir Edmund said. It was not a question. Gareth leaned on his axe, trying to appear calm despite the fear that gripped him. "I found an injured pup, yes. I cared for it until it healed, then released it back into the forest. That was months ago." "Is that so?" The hunter's eyes narrowed. "How very charitable of you. Tell me, peasant, did it not occur to you that by nursing that animal back to health, you may have contributed to the pack that now plagues our lands? That wolf you saved could be part of the very group we now hunt." "I did what any Christian would do," Gareth replied carefully. "I showed mercy to a suffering creature. I did not think it would cause harm." "Mercy," Sir Edmund repeated as if the word were distasteful. "Mercy is for the deserving, not for beasts. But no matter. The animal is gone now, you say. Then you will have no objection if I search your property to ensure that no wolves lurk nearby." Before Gareth could respond, Sir Edmund strode toward the cottage. Panic seized Gareth. Thomas was inside, and while the boy was in human form now, there was no telling how he would react to the presence of armed men, whether his wolf instincts might surface, whether the stress might even trigger a transformation. Gareth moved to intercept the hunter, placing himself in the doorway. "There is no need," he said quickly. There is nothing in my home but myself and my cousin's boy, whom I care for. Then you will not mind if I confirm that, Sir Edmund said coldly, pushing past Gareth with casual violence that sent the peasant stumbling. Inside, Thomas stood by the hearth, his small body tense, his eyes reflecting the firelight with an amber gleam. Sir Edmund stopped short, his hand moving instinctively toward his sword. The boy and the hunter stared at each other, and in that moment, Gareth saw recognition flash across Sir Edmund's face. Not recognition of Thomas specifically, but recognition of something other, something that triggered every instinct the hunter possessed. "Who is this?" Sir Edmund demanded, not taking his eyes off Thomas. "My cousin's son," Gareth said, moving to stand between them. "His name is Thomas. His parents died of plague. He has nowhere else to go." The hunter circled slowly, his gaze raking over Thomas, taking in every detail. The boy stood perfectly still, but Gareth could see the tension in him, could see how his hands had curled into claw-like shapes at his sides. "This is your cousin's child," Sir Edmund said flatly. "He does not look much like you." "Children often favor their mother's side," Gareth replied, his voice steady despite the hammering of his heart. "What difference does it make? He is a child, an orphan. I'm caring for him as my faith demands." "Your faith," Sir Edmund sneered. He took a step closer to Thomas, and Gareth saw the boy's lips pull back slightly, saw the flash of teeth that seemed for just an instant too sharp, too predatory. "Tell me, boy," the hunter said softly, "do you dream of running? Do you dream of the hunt, of blood on your tongue, of the moon calling your name?" Thomas said nothing, but his eyes never left Sir Edmund's face, and in that stare was a wildness that no human child should possess. The hunter smiled, though there was no warmth in it. "I thought as much," he murmured. He turned to Gareth. "You are harboring something unnatural, peasant. I do not know precisely what, but I know it when I see it. There are stories, old legends about creatures that walk as both man and beast. I always thought them children's tales, but looking at this boy, I wonder." "You wonder wrong," Brother Aldrich's voice rang out from the doorway, startling them all. The monk entered with an authority that belied his humble robes. "I have examined the boy myself, Sir Edmund. He's fully human, merely traumatized by the loss of his parents. The strange look in his eyes is nothing more than grief and fear, both of which you're presently adding to." Sir Edmund rounded on the monk, anger flashing in his eyes. "You presume much, brother. I answer to Lord Blackwood, not to the Church in this matter." "And yet the Church has authority over spiritual matters," Brother Aldrich countered calmly. "If you are suggesting that this child is somehow touched by darkness, then it falls within my purview to investigate and pronounce judgment. I have done so, and I find nothing but a frightened boy who has lost everything. Unless you have actual evidence of wrongdoing, I suggest you return to your hunt and leave these innocents in peace." For a long moment the two men stared at each other, the tension thick enough to cut. Finally, Sir Edmund stepped back, though his expression remained hostile. "Very well, brother. I will defer to your expertise in this instance, but I will be watching. If anything untoward occurs, if there is any hint that my suspicions are correct, I will return, and I will not be so easily dissuaded a second time." With that, he strode from the cottage, mounting his horse and leading his men back toward the forest. Gareth sagged with relief, but Brother Aldrich's expression remained grave. "That was too close," the monk said quietly, glancing at Thomas, who had finally relaxed, his small body shaking with the aftermath of fear. "He knows, or at least suspects. You cannot stay here much longer, Gareth. It is only a matter of time before Sir Edmund finds the proof he seeks or manufactures it himself." "Where would we go?" Gareth asked desperately. "I have no money, no connections beyond this village. I have been making inquiries," Brother Aldrich said. "There is a monastery far to the north, in the mountains beyond the kingdom's borders. The abbot there is an old friend, a man who, like my own master, remembers the old knowledge, who understands that the world is more complex than the Church often admits." He would give you sanctuary, would protect Thomas until the boy is old enough to decide his own path. It is not a perfect solution, but it is the best I can offer." Gareth looked down at Thomas, who had come to stand beside him, the boy's small hand slipping into his. The child looked up at him with those wolf-amber eyes, and Gareth saw trust there, absolute and unshakable. How could he fail that trust? How could he do anything other than whatever it took to keep this child safe? "Then we will go," Gareth said firmly. "When?" "Tonight," Brother Aldrich replied. "Sir Edmund is not a patient man. Once he returns to Lord Blackwood and makes his report, the Lord may decide to investigate further. You must be gone before that happens. I will provide what supplies I can, and a map to the monastery. The journey will be hard, especially with a child, but you are strong, Gareth, stronger than you know." That night, as the village slept, Gareth and Thomas slipped away like shadows. They carried little, only what they could fit in a single pack. Food, blankets, a tinderbox, and the few possessions Gareth could not bear to leave behind. Brother Aldrich met them at the edge of the forest, pressing a small purse of coins into Gareth's hand, money the monk had likely been saving for years. The monk blessed them both, tracing the sign of the cross on their foreheads, and Thomas, who had been taught the gesture, did not flinch away. "Remember," Brother Aldrich said, gripping Gareth's shoulder, "the boy is special. He straddles two worlds, and that is a heavy burden to bear. But it is also a gift. In time, when he has grown and has learned to control his nature, Thomas could be a bridge between the human and natural worlds, a reminder that we need not fear what we do not understand. Raise him well, Gareth. Teach him compassion, wisdom, and strength. The world needs more of all three." With those words echoing in his mind, Gareth led Thomas into the forest, following the map Brother Aldrich had provided. They travelled by night, sleeping during the day in whatever shelter they could find. Thomas proved remarkably resilient, his wolf nature lending him endurance and senses that often warned them of danger before Gareth could perceive it. More than once, the boy detected the presence of bandits or wild animals, allowing them to alter their course and avoid confrontation. As they journeyed north, the land grew wilder, the forests deeper and older. They passed through villages where the old ways still held some power, where people left offerings at standing stones and spoke of spirits that dwelled in the hills. In these places, Gareth felt they could breathe a little easier, felt that even if someone discovered Thomas's secret, they might not immediately react with violence. Still, they kept to themselves, never staying in one place long enough to form attachments or draw scrutiny. One night, camped in a grove of ancient oaks, Thomas transformed again. This time Gareth was prepared, holding the boy through the agony of shifting, whispering reassurances as wolf replaced human. When it was done, Storm looked up at him with eyes that held both gratitude and sorrow. Gareth understood. The transformations were part of what Thomas was, but they were also painful, a constant reminder that he belonged fully to neither world. In wolf form, the boy ran through the moonlit forest, and Gareth followed at a distance, watching as Thomas hunted, as he howled at the sky, as he embraced the wildness that was his birthright. When dawn approached, Thomas returned and transformed back, exhausted but somehow more settled, as if the run had eased some deep ache within him. They continued north for weeks, the journey testing them in ways Gareth had never imagined. They forded icy rivers, climbed steep mountain passes, endured storms that seemed intent on driving them back. Yet they persisted, driven by the knowledge that safety lay ahead, that somewhere in these unforgiving mountains was a place where Thomas could simply be himself without fear. Gareth found himself changing too, his body growing leaner and harder, his spirit more determined. He had always thought of himself as weak, as someone who endured rather than overcame. But protecting Thomas had awakened something in him, a fierce protectiveness that gave him strength he had not known he possessed. At last, as spring gave way to early summer, They crested a final ridge and saw it, a monastery perched on a mountainside like an eagle's nest, its stone walls weathered by centuries of wind and snow. Smoke rose from its chimneys, and bells rang out across the valley, their sound clear and pure. Gareth felt tears sting his eyes. They had made it. Against all odds, they had survived. The abbot who greeted them was an ancient man. His face seamed with age, but his eyes bright with intelligence and compassion. He listened to their story without interruption, his gaze moving between Gareth and Thomas, seeing them truly in a way few ever had. When Gareth finished, the abbot nodded slowly. "You are welcome here," he said simply. "Both of you. This monastery has always been a place of refuge for those who do not fit elsewhere, for those who seek truth rather than easy answers. Young Thomas, you will find others here who understand what it means to be different, who will not fear you, but will help you learn to master your gifts. And Gareth, you will find honest work and a place to rest, knowing that the child you have saved is safe." They stayed. The monastery became their home, and the monks became their family. Thomas grew under their guidance, learning to control his transformations, to balance his wolf nature with his human mind. He studied with the monks, learning to read and write, learning philosophy and theology and the natural sciences. He also learned from the forest, spending hours in wolf form, exploring the mountains, understanding the intricate web of life that connected all things. Gareth worked in the monastery's fields and workshops, his skills as a peasant proving valuable in maintaining the community's self-sufficiency. He aged, his hair turning grey, his body slowly surrendering to the years of hard labor. But he was content, perhaps for the first time in his life. He watched Thomas grow from a frightened child into a young man of remarkable character, someone who embodied both the compassion of humanity and the fierce loyalty of the wolf. The boy never forgot where he came from, never forgot the sacrifice Gareth had made, the life he had left behind to keep one small child safe. Years later, when Gareth lay on his deathbed, old and worn but at peace, Thomas sat beside him. The young man held Gareth's weathered hand, and there were tears on his face, though he did not sob or wail. He simply stayed, present and steady, as Gareth had been for him all those years ago. "You gave me everything," Thomas said quietly. "You could have walked past me in that forest. You could have left me to die, you could have given me up when it became dangerous, but you did not. You showed me what it means to love without condition, to protect without expectation of reward. I will carry that lesson always." Gareth smiled, his breath coming shallow now. "You were never a burden," he whispered. "You were a gift. You taught me that courage is not the absence of fear, but the choice to act despite it. You showed me that family is not always blood, but often the bonds we forge through choice and sacrifice. I would do it all again, gladly." As the sun set beyond the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Gareth closed his eyes for the last time. Thomas stayed with him until the end, and then, as the stars emerged overhead, he walked into the forest and transformed. His howl rose into the night, a song of grief and gratitude, of endings and beginnings, and from distant mountains other wolves answered, their voices joining his in a chorus that spoke of the eternal cycle of life, death, and the love that binds us all. Thomas remained at the monastery, eventually becoming a healer like Brother Aldrich had been, using his unique understanding of both human and animal nature to tend to the sick and injured. He became a legend in his own right, the wolf monk, they called him, a man who could walk between worlds and who brought wisdom from both. He never forgot the peasant who had saved him, who had given up everything so that a lost wolf pup might have a chance to become who he was meant to be. And whenever he told his story, he began the same way. "There was once a man named Gareth," he would say, "a simple peasant who possessed the rarest gift of all, the ability to see worth where others saw only danger, to offer love where others offered fear. He taught me that true strength lies not in power or privilege, but in the willingness to stand between the vulnerable and the world's cruelty." He is gone now, but his legacy lives on in every life I touch, every kindness I offer, every moment I choose compassion over convenience. We are all shaped by the hands that lift us when we fall, and I was fortunate beyond measure to be lifted by his. The story of Gareth and the wolf child spread beyond the monastery, becoming a tale told in villages and castles alike. Some dismissed it as fantasy. Others saw in it a deeper truth about the nature of humanity and the possibility of redemption. But for those who had known Gareth, for those who had witnessed his quiet courage and unwavering devotion, there was no question. He had been a hero, not because he wielded a sword or commanded armies, but because he had chosen love over fear, had chosen to see the child within the beast, had chosen to risk everything for someone who could offer nothing in return. And in the end, is that not the measure of a soul? Not what we gain, but what we give. Not how we are served, but how we serve. Not the comfort we keep, but the comfort we sacrifice so that others might know warmth. Gareth understood this, perhaps without even realizing it, and in understanding it, in living it, he became something greater than himself. He became a testament to the truth that even the humblest among us can change the world, one act of mercy at a time. So remember this story, let it settle into your heart, and remind you that compassion is never wasted, that courage comes in many forms, and that sometimes the greatest adventures begin not with a quest for glory, but with a simple decision to help someone in need. We all have our wolves to save, our storms to weather, our mountains to climb. The question is not whether we are capable, but whether we are willing. Gareth was willing, and because of that willingness, 2 lives were redeemed. A bond was forged that transcended death itself, and the world became, if only by a small measure, a more beautiful place. If this story has moved you, if it has reminded you of the power of compassion and the importance of protecting the vulnerable, then I invite you to like this video, to subscribe to Medieval Stories, so you can hear more tales of courage, sacrifice, and redemption, and to leave a comment below sharing your thoughts. Have you ever shown mercy to someone or something others might have ignored or feared? Have you been the recipient of unexpected kindness? Tell us your story, because every story matters, and together our stories weave a tapestry of hope that can sustain us through even the darkest times. Thank you for listening, and may you find your own courage to save the wolf pups in your life, whatever form they may take.